Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Baba Batra. We are up to Perek Zayin, Mishnah Alayev. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Renbai, Veliyahu ben Burcha, Israelov, Chana ben Miriam, Sason ben Raya, and Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. And Avdi ben Chaim lechaim, v'derefua shelema, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, betoch Shachole Israel, and Achlama Merav Binyamin, Od Sion Chai ben Dvorah. The 7th chapter of the Masechet discusses various laws that apply to the sales of fields. The example used in the following Mishnayot is the sale of a bet kur. This is the area of land upon which one can plant a kur of barley, which is 75,000 square amot. A kur equals 30 se'ah, or 180 kavs. The size of a bet kur in today's measures is somewhere between 4.27 and 6.6 acres, depending on the various opinions as to the length of an amah. The first Mishnah discusses the sale of land that is to be used for planting. If someone says to his fellow, I am selling you a bet kur of earth, which is bet kur afar, he must give the buyer a full bet kur of farmland that can be plowed easily and planted with crops. Therefore we measured the land, and if there were cracks in the field surface that were more than 10 tefachim deep, so that the part of the field that is on the floor of the cracks is 10 tefachim lower than the rest of the field. So the commentators explain the seller promised to deliver a bet kur of earth, not a particular piece of land. Therefore, the land that he wishes to give the buyer is measured to make sure it contains a full 75,000 square amot. Or if there were stones that were higher than 10 tefachim, so that the area on top of the stones is 10 tefachim higher than the rest of the land, and non-nimdadin imah, these areas are not measured with the field. The area of the stones and the land within the cracks do not count towards its 75,000 square amot of plantable land that the seller must provide, because a buyer who pays for one field cannot be given land that is on 2 or 3 different levels. Now, it's very difficult to mow a plow and the oxen that pull it from one level of ground to another. Therefore, the seller must give the buyer a full bet kur of land without counting the land inside the cracks. The buyer cannot complain that he has to maneuver around the cracks and stones, however, because it's normal for field to have obstacles of this sort. Now, this law applies only if the 10 tefach cracks or stones are also at least 4 tefachim wide and 4 tefachim long as well. Smaller cracks and stones, even tall ones, are not significant, and their area is not deducted from the measure of the field. Now, the buyer is entitled to a full bet kur of plantable land only because the seller said that he was selling a bet kur of earth. Had he simply said that he was selling a bet kur without adding the words of earth, then even if the entire field was full of stones, the sale would stand, because the seller could claim that he had sold the land to be used for building houses on or for spreading produce there to dry. Pachod mikan nimdadinima, but if they are smaller than this, they are measured with it. Rocks less than 10 tefachim high and cracks less than 10 tefachim deep are considered a normal part of every field, because no field is perfectly level. Therefore, the seller can include them toward the measurement of 75,000 square amot. Even smaller stones and cracks are included only if all of them combined make up a total area of less than 4 kavs, which is 2/3 of a se'ah and 1/45 of the area of the bet kur. If their combined area is more than this, they are not counted in the measure of the bet kur. Now, the Mishnah states these laws about both cracks and stones to teach that even stones, which cannot be planted upon at all, are included in the measure of the field if they are lower than 10 tefachim, and even cracks which can be planted in are not included if they are deeper than 10 tefachim. If the seller used a slightly different description of the field that he was selling, the rules are different. But if the seller said to the buyer, I am selling you a field that is like a bet kur of earth, he is not required to deliver a complete bet kur that is on one level. Therefore, even if there were cracks deeper than 10 tefachim in the field, or stones higher than 10 tefachim, they are measured with the rest of the field. By stating that the field he is offering is like a bet kur, the seller shows that he is calling the field as it is a full bet kur, even if the entire bet kur is not on one level, because it has tall stones or deep cracks. And that is end of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet teaches what must be done if a field being sold is measured and found to be either larger or smaller than the agreed upon size. As in the previous Mishnah, the case used as an example is the sale of a bet kur, a field of 180 kav. The laws that apply depend upon what language the seller used when making the sale. Bet kur afar ani mocher lecha midat bechevel. If the seller said, I am selling you a bet kur of earth as measured by the line, This language means that he intended to sell a field that measures exactly 180 kav. Pichet kol shu yinakeh. Therefore, if the field measures even a little bit less than this, he must deduct from the sale price. Hotil kol shu yachzir. And if there was even a little bit of extra land, the buyer must give back. Im amar hen chaser hen yater. But if the seller said, I'm selling you a bet kol of earth, a bit less or a bit more, afilu pichet rova lis'a or hotil rova lis'a, then even if the measure of the field is a quarter kav per seah less or a quarter kav per seah more than it should be, Higi'o, the buyer keeps the field as it is and no refund is made. Since the seller stated that he was selling a field that was more or less the size of a bet kol, a discrepancy of up to 7.5 kavs either way, which is 1/24 of the total or about 4.2%, is acceptable and the sale stands without adjustment of the price. Therefore, when a seller says that he is selling a bet kol, which is 180 kav, that is a bit less or a bit more, if the field measures anywhere between 172.5 kav and 187.5 kav, the sale stands as it is and the price is not adjusted. Now, although the Mishnah teaches that a discrepancy of up to 7.5 bet kav per kol is allowed only in a case where the seller said a bit less or a bit more, even if he simply said, I'm selling you a bet kol, this discrepancy is also allowed, as long as he did not use the words as measured by the line. Yoter mikan yaseh cheshbon. However, if the missing or extra land is more than this, meaning more than the 7.5 kav per bet kol, then we must make a reckoning of how much is missing or extra and make an adjustment to the sale as follows. If the land is measured and found to be smaller than required, even a bit smaller in the Mishnah's first case, where the seller said he was selling exactly a bet kol, and more than 7.5 kav per bet kol smaller in the Mishnah's second case, where he said he was selling a bet kol more or less, the seller must refund some of the sale price to the buyer. However, when there is more land than a bet kol, even a bit extra in the Mishnah's first case, or more than 7.5 kav extra in the second case, the way the sale is adjusted depends upon what the seller wants to do, like the Mishnah will explain. What must the buyer return to the seller if the land is larger than a bet kol? Money. The buyer must pay the seller additional money for the extra land, which the buyer then keeps along with the rest of the field. But if the seller wants him to return the extra land instead, the buyer must return the extra land to him. The seller has a choice either to take back the extra land or be paid for it. The Mishnah explains why the sages gave this option to the seller, and why did they say the buyer must return additional money to the seller for the extra land, even though the buyer had not agreed to buy more than a bet kol. All the buyer should have done is return the extra land. You only agreed to purchase a bet kol. Why does he have to pay more money to get that extra land? In order to strengthen the hand of the seller, so he will not be left with a very small parcel of land that will be useless to him. In order to make sure that the seller will not suffer this financial loss, the sages required the buyer to purchase the additional land if that is what the seller wants. However, the seller does not have this option if the amount of extra land is large enough to be useful on its own. Because this option of selling the extra land is given to the seller only to protect him from loss. The law is that if the extra land that is left after the full bet kol has been measured as 9 kav or more, which is a useful crop that can be planted because you need at least 9 kav of land, ubagina bet chatzi kav, or if the land being sold is not a grain field but a garden, if the extra land is at least half a kav in size, ukidivrei Rabbi Akiva bet rova, and according to Rabbi Akiva, if the extra garden land is at least a quarter kav in size, Machzilo tekalka, the buyer returns the extra land to the seller, and we do not make him buy it. Since a grain field that is 9 kav or larger can be planted on its own, the seller can keep the extra land without suffering a loss, and there is no reason to make the buyer buy it. In the case of a garden as well, since a garden that is half a kav in size, or according to Rabbi Akiva, even a garden that is a quarter kav in size is large enough to be useful, the buyer returns the extra land and does not have to buy it. The final law of the Mishnah makes clear that although a discrepancy of up to 7.5 kav per bet kol is acceptable, when the seller said that the field was more or less a bet kol, this does not mean that the first 7.5 kav of extra land is kept by the buyer if the amount of extra land is greater than this. And it is not only the land that is in excess of the quarter kav per se'ah, meaning the extra land above and beyond 7.5 kav per bet kol, that the buyer must return. Rather, he must return all of the excess land. If the amount of extra land is more than 7.5 kav, and a reckoning must be made, the seller forgives nothing, and all of the extra land must be returned to him or paid for, depending on exactly how much extra land there is, like the Mishnah explained earlier. So in summary, when a seller sells a field and says that it is more or less a bet kor, then 1, if the field measures less than 172.5 kav, the seller must refund money to the buyer. 2, if the field measures between 172.5 kav and 187.5 kav, the sale stands. 3, if the field measures more than 187.5 kav, but less than 189 kav, the seller has the option to either take back whatever is over 180 kav or to be paid for it. And 4, if the field measures 189 kav or more, the seller does not have this option, but simply takes back all the extra land. And that is in about today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.